Welcome to episode 87 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who is not familiar with our podcast, please visit EpicureanFriends.com, where you'll find our goals and our ground rules. If you have any questions about the podcast, please be sure to contact us at the forum for more information. In this episode 87, we'll read approximately Latin lines 527 through 700 as we discuss rains and storms and earthquakes and similar geological phenomena. Now let's join Martin reading today's text.
Learn now the cause of earthquakes, and first you are to suppose that the earth is the same below as it is above, that it is every way full of winds and caverns, and that it holds within its bowels many lakes and pools and rocks and broken stones. You must believe that many hidden rivers flow with rapid waves within, and roll the jagged rocks along their tide, for the laws of nature require that the earth within and without should be the same. This being premised and supposed, the earth trembles and shakes above with dreadful ruin when age has tumbled in these mighty caverns. For then whole mountains sink, and in a moment, with a horrid shock, spread frightful tremblings all abroad. And no wonder, since whole houses by the highway side will quake as carts, with no great weight, pass through the streets, and so they start as chariots swiftly drive with mettled horses. They shake at every jumping of the wheel. This happens likewise when great weights of earth, loosened by time, plunge down into these deep and mighty lakes. For then the waters rage, and the earth reels and staggers with a shock, as a vessel on the ground cannot stand firm unless the liquid ceases to ferment and toss within. Besides, when winds collected in the caverns of the earth direct their force one way, and beat with fury on these hollow places, the earth inclines that way where the winds point their stroke, and our buildings raised above, not that way too. The highest shake the most. The hanging beams start from the wall and threaten to fly out, and yet men are afraid to think that nature has fixed a fatal time when this great world shall be destroyed and fall to ruin, although they see the heavy mass of earth leaning and tumbling to pieces. And did not the winds take time to breathe, nothing could check their fury, or keep them from destroying everything before them. But since they cease by turns, then rage again, and storm with double force, and are again repelled, hence it is that the earth oftener threatens us with ruin than actually affects it. It inclines only and then falls back, and so moved aside, settles all its weight again in its former place. For this reason all our houses tremble and reel. The highest shakes the most, the middle less, the lowest little or nothing. The great tremblings of the earth may arise yet from another cause, when wind or violent blasts, raised either from without or within the earth itself, throw themselves furiously into these hollow caverns, and in these vast dens roar and toss themselves about, and when they have roared within and rage with all their might, they break abroad at last, and cleave the solid earth, and make a hideous chasm. This happened at Sidon, a city of the Tyrians, and at Aegea in Peloponnesus. What cities has this eruption of the wind destroyed? What earthquakes has it produced? At land, the walls of many towns have tumbled down by these violent concussions. Many cities, with all its inhabitants, have sunk together into the sea. But if the wind does not break through, yet the fury and raging force of its blasts are scattered through the many pores of the earth like a shivering cold, and cause a shuddering in its bowels, as the cold, when it seizes upon our limbs, makes us shake against our will and tremble all over. Then men stagger with doubtful fear in all the cities. They are in dread of the houses above them and of the earth under their feet, lest nature should instantly break to pieces the caverns below, lest the divided earth should open wide its jaws and fill them with the utter desolation of men and houses. Even those who think the heavens and the earth are eternal and will be preserved safe forever, yet the present dread of impending danger staggers them, and raises terrible apprehensions, lest the earth should instantly fall under their feet and sink into the great abyss, lest the dissolution of the universe from the very foundation should follow, and the fabric of the world should fall into ruin and confusion. And now we are to account why the waters of the sea are never increased. And first men wonder that nature does not enlarge the bounds of the sea in proportion to the falls of water, and the streams of so many rivers that from all parts flow into it. Besides the wandering showers and flying storms that pour down and discharge themselves upon lands and seas, You may add the fountains and springs likewise. But all these, compared to the vastness of the sea, are hardly more than one drop of water, and therefore can contribute little to its increase. No wonder then that the wide sea rolls within the same bounds. And then the sun licks up a great part of its water with its heat. For we see the sun dries a garment, dripping wet with its burning rays. And the sea, we know, is widely spread and exposed to the influence of his beams. And though the sun draws up very little quantity of moisture from every part of the sea, yet, with so vast a circumference, a great store of water must be drawn off. The winds, likewise brushing over the surface of the sea, carry off a large part, for we observe the roads are frequently dried in one night, and the soft dirt grows hard. Besides, I have shown that the clouds suck up a great deal of moisture from the wide sea, and then scatter it down over the whole earth, when the rain falls and the wind drives the clouds through the sky. Lastly, since the earth is of a rare contexture, and full of pores, and every way surrounds the body of the sea which joins to it, it follows that as the waters flow from the earth into the sea, so they must return from thence into the earth again. In these subterraneous passages, the saline particles are strained off, and the waters flow back, and unite together at the fountainheads, from whence they glide sweetly with their collected strength over the earth through those channels where the streams first cut their liquid way. Now learn the cause why fires break out with so much fury from the jaws of Mount Etna. For we are not to suppose such a tempest of fire rages over the plains of Sicily, and brings such destruction with it from the gods, as if it only raised the admiration of all the neighboring people, who, seeing the whole heavens sparkling with fire and full of smoke, trembled with anxious concern and wondered what new phenomenon nature was going to produce. The reason of these events requires a deeper and wider search. You must enter first into all their parts, and then you will recollect that the universe of things is infinite, and observe how small a part, scarce one of 1,000, is one heaven, in comparison of the whole, and what a poor pittance of the whole earth is one man. If you consider this well and observe closely, you will cease wondering at many things which now raise your admiration. For where is the wonder with any of us if a man receives the burning heat of a fever within his veins, or feels the anguish of any other disease in his limbs? For our foot often swells of a sudden, a sharp pain frequently seizes upon our teeth and attacks our eyes. There is such a thing as the holy fire over the body, and burns the part it fixes upon, and creeps over the limbs. Nothing strange, for the seeds of things are in great abundance, and the earth and the heavens afford sufficient supplies of hurtful seeds from whence the sharpest diseases may be produced in us. And therefore you must think that large store of seeds may flow from the infinite space and supply the earth and the whole heaven. These may cause those sudden and violent tremblings of the earth, that rapid whirlwinds scour along the land and sea, and that there's abundant fuel for the flames of Etna, and that the sky is all in a blaze. For this happens, and the heavens are on fire when the seeds of flame unite, as the storms of rain are the more violent when the seeds of water are collected and joined together. But you will say the fire of Etna is too great and impetuous. By the same rule, a river, not very large, appears a mighty stream to one who never saw a greater. And so a man or a tree that seems prodigious, and all other bodies that we see, we imagine are extraordinary. When, alas, all beings with the heavens, the earth, and the sea together are nothing to the vast universe of all. And now I shall explain by what means the raging flame bursts suddenly abroad from the vast fiery entrails of this mountain. And first nature has formed the whole mountain hollow within, and supports these cavities by arches of stone. Now all caverns are filled with wind and air, for air, when it is violently moved, becomes wind. And this wind, when it is grown hot and furiously whirling about, has inflamed the stones and the earth by beating upon them, and from them has struck out sparks of fire with rapid flame. Then it raises itself up, it throws itself violently out of the open jaws at the top into the air. Then it pours the fire abroad and spreads the burning embers all about, and belches dusty clouds of rolling smoke, and shoots out rocks of wondrous weight. This, no doubt, is done by furious blasts of wind within. Besides, the sea, for a great way, dashes its waves against the roots of this mountain, and then again sucks up its tide. The waters press into these caverns that lie directly under those open jaws. This you must allow, and the flames, yielding to the driving floods there, force their passage out and fly abroad, and cast the fire on high, and throw out rocks and raise whole clouds of sand, for on the summit there are certain basins where wind is generated. The Greeks call them so, we call them mouths and jaws.
Martin, thank you for reading such a long section today. We decided to take a longer section because the topic seemed to be pretty similar from start to finish today, involving earthquakes and things that go on below the surface, including, it sounds like, volcanoes. But there are also mixed into this section of geology some pretty interesting assertions about logic and the way we should think about things as well. So there's plenty to talk about here today, even if we didn't have a longer section. So going back to the beginning, 535, Don, do you have any comments on the opening section?
Oh, I thought it was interesting the way that he talks about, what's underneath the earth. I mean, he talks about the lakes and the pools and the rocks and the broken stones. So he's obviously aware or has talked to people that have been down in caverns and caves and those kinds of things. So again, I think that's kind of interesting the way he brings that all in. There, hidden rivers flow with rapid waves and this kind of thing. So he definitely knows what's going on geologically under the earth.
Well, we are going to have a special session on the topic that I'm about to bring up, and I'm not going to go into it very far because I promised I would not. But when I look at the last passage of this first one, where it says, quote, "For the laws of nature require that the earth within and without should be the same," I read that as a reference to the very important Epicurean method of reasoning and use of logic. That is something that I think distinguishes Epicurus from Plato and Aristotle and many others. I noticed, just checking the other translations, I see that Monroe renders that as, "For the very nature of the case requires it to be throughout like to itself." And then Bailey renders that as, "For clear fact demands that it should be in all parts like itself." I bet you we could have a podcast devoted entirely to that assertion right there, because it seems to me that's a pretty profound logical assertion that I think Martin will be the first among us to point out has some limitations to it and that we have to be careful about. And yet, in looking at the way Lucretius and Epicurus are reasoning here, I think there's a lot to learn from it. Martin, what do you think about that last passage in line 535?
Yeah, so the thing is that this generalization, so that one is something what is the same pattern as the isonomia applied to conclude that there are other words as well. But now looking at something specific, this may not necessarily apply, because the surface is exposed to different environmental conditions than the deep inside. So that means what we also it may be possible that we have something deeper inside. And he will certainly have been aware of caves which are easily accessible. But at some point, they will have had limitations to go much deeper than that. No? We know nowadays, especially since there was a Russian expedition a couple of years ago, I think they went nearly 2 kilometers down along one crack. And they really encountered something like this. So quite deep down, there was suddenly a pool of water where they had to take out their diving gear and dive through it.
Wow.
Some of the descriptions he has here there are places where it holds, but in most cases we don't have that deep cracks, and the solid part of the earth is pretty much under that high pressure. There are not a lot of caves, but I mean what we know now, the major mechanism of earthquakes is different from what he presents. It's just the movement of the tectonic plates. But this is a new thing. This is known just for 100 years or something like that. And of course, then when these plates move against each other, then of course some caverns may be produced. But the deeper you go, the higher the pressure is, these are very likely to get filled. Also, further down, there is then the transition between the crust and where the rock is liquid. We will later see that this is what comes out on the volcano. So and there will certainly not be big cavities, because under that high pressure there, any cavity is likely to be squashed. Unless, of course, it's a gas which has assembled there into a bubble. That may be the case.
That's a really good point, Martin. I think whenever you talk about the fact that he would have known about caves that were easily accessible, and that he's trying to, it seems to me, extrapolate between I can go down in caves or I can talk to people that have gone down in caves, and obviously caves go down as far as we can tell, because what else could be there, I think, seems to be what's in his mind. And so he's trying to come up with ideas for the reason for earthquakes that involve caves and winds and waters and that sort of thing, and would have no inkling about tectonic plates and shifting of the crust and that sort of thing. That I think that's a really good point that he's trying to extrapolate from what he knows to something bigger, and there's no way he's going to get from caves to tectonic plates just in that kind of a reasoning.
Yes, but then actually there are cave quakes. Huh? So that means minor cause of local earthquakes is actually what he thinks about. That the portion above a cave falls into the cave. Huh? So if that happens suddenly, then we will have a local earthquake. So this is a mechanism for earthquakes which actually does happen.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I mean, like sinkholes and things like that. It seems to me he's taking then those localized phenomenon or smaller scale phenomenon and extrapolating them to larger, city destroying earthquakes and others like that.
Yes, and especially for a big earthquake, when we have a lot of movement at the rim between two tectonic plates, then you can see this. You have the external observation that at that where this crack, where these plates move against each other, but one part is moved up, the other one is pushed down, or actually a crack may open and widen.
Exactly. Yep.
So and this all supports from a simple idea like what you said before. You get then this idea that there are caves below, which then when the material redistributes into them, that may cause this.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think he's just trying to extrapolate from those smaller scales that he's seen and knows about and has talked to people to larger scale things that it doesn't. I think we've even said before, and I think you've said on the podcast before about you can't necessarily take a localized or smaller phenomenon and extrapolate into something bigger.
Mm-hmm. And that is exactly the point that I'm not going to belabor today, but we need to come back to again and again and in some other formats as well, because it clearly is inherent in the Epicurean reasoning system that we are going to base our conclusions on the things that we can observe locally, and we're going to give those local observations significant weight as we extrapolate out into the things that we cannot observe locally. And that process has hazards and limitations within it that may be hazards and limitations, but they're a whole lot better than relying on the gods or on fate or on some other type of approach to, I will go ahead and say, formal logic that is not necessarily connected with reality. We'll come back to all that on another day, but I want to continue to maintain that approach to thinking, which I think is elaborated in much more detail in the Philodemus on methods of inference or on signs, depending on what you think the title of that particular scroll is really. And that's just one of the most fascinating and important issues, I think, in Epicurean philosophy. But we're not going to solve that in one podcast today. So let's move a little further.
One of the lines I liked from that earlier section there was the earth oftener threatens us with ruin than actually affects it. So I thought that was kind of a fun little line there. It's like, it's not always going to kill you, but you're going to think it is.
Well, did you pick that up? Is it 557 or 552? You're looking at the
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so if we go to 557, where I'm looking at the moment, I think that's connected with this idea that, quote, and yet men are afraid to think that nature has fixed a fatal time when this great world shall be destroyed and fall to ruin. That seems to be another one of those themes he comes back to regularly, that our world had a point in time that it originated, and it's going to have a point in time that it ends.
Right.
Basically, everything has that, just like the human soul has that. And every human has a point of origination and a point of ending. So you connect these issues theologically. I remember there's a section, I can't remember if it's in Peter or one of the books of the New Testament, where there's a reference to certain people arguing that things are the same as they've always been. And I guess it's easy to get kind of wrapped up in, if you think God created the universe and God has put the earth in the center of the universe and everything here is set up in the best possible way for men to survive, and you think it's all going to be permanent, then you resist the idea that the earth could be destroyed by a meteor or be destroyed in some other way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like that line there. Men are afraid to think that nature has fixed a fatal time when this great world shall be destroyed. That's a good line there.
It's not that they just don't think it, but they're afraid.
They're afraid to think it. Exactly. And the same way with same way with the whole Epicurean attitude towards death itself. I mean,
right.
Look it square in the face and say, I'm not going to exist, so there's no reason to be afraid of it. And same way thing here, people are just even afraid to think of the fact that the world may not exist, and so they're just going to shy away from it.
Right. Now, as we move forward to 577 and 591, one of the things that I see there, and maybe throughout the rest of this material we have for today, is, of course, I know I'm the one who probably spends too much time watching YouTube videos on the lost civilization of Atlantis and things like that. But we know that Plato had a lot of material. I guess that's the Timaeus that he talks about, the destruction of the city of Atlantis. And this, of course, doesn't mention anything like Atlantis. It just talks about real world cities that have been destroyed by earthquakes or by sinking into the sea.
I was while Martin was reading, I noticed the mention of the city of Sidon there. And so I tried to find real quick, what earthquake Lucretius was talking about for that particular city. And I came across so many mentions of earthquakes that I couldn't find anything that would be contemporaneous with him. But it seemed like every other article I looked at was like, oh, it was destroyed in this year. Oh, no, destroyed again in this year. Oh, and by the way, it was destroyed again in this year. So evidently there have been a lot of earthquakes in that area of Syria.
I don't even know where Sidon is. So it's in Syria?
Yeah. That's at least what I could find.
And I guess he's talking about Aegea in Peloponnesus. I guess that's obviously some part of the Greek mainland.
The Peloponnese is where Sparta is and that area.
Yeah. I regularly think about how irritating it is to me that so many Greek and Roman temples and so forth, I presume, have been destroyed by the Christians over the years. But it sounds like there's a lot of attrition due to earthquakes over the years as well in that
earthquakes
area.
And lightning bolts, according to the last session.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Both of them have taken their toll on those temples over the years.
Evidently, the gods want to remodel a lot.
Yeah, and it's not all a matter of removing the stones so we can build churches and the Vatican and so forth.
Yeah, Zeus wants a new temple.
Okay, let's see. I don't want to move too fast. Anything else buried in those? He's basically making the point, too, that we ought to be able to observe that since our local towns and cities and so forth have been destroyed by earthquakes and maybe even floods over time, that if the damage had been just somewhat stronger, then maybe the whole earth would have been destroyed. So the local instances of disasters are an example to us that the disaster could be even stronger and take out the whole thing. And actually, I think that may be one of the real, in addition to just explaining how these happen naturally, I think that's one of the arguments he's making here, is that we can look at these examples of devastation that take place and realize that the whole earth is subject to the same thing.
I thought it was interesting in paragraph 591 where he's equating a person with some sort of condition or disease or something that, seizes upon our limbs and make us shake against our will and tremble all over. So he's equating the human body, or not, I shouldn't say equating, but he's using the metaphor of the human body as the earth itself. You might have a cold or a fever or something, and you're shaking and stuff. It's the same sort of thing. Something happens, one part of the earth, and it causes everything to shake and shiver.
Yeah, he's analogizing it. And when I first read that, I thought, my gosh, this is ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, I'm not so sure it is so ridiculous, really, because you do start to shiver and shake.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when you get a bad flu bug or something like that, my heavens, yeah. And I noticed that your Browne translation has cold capitalized, and I wasn't quite sure whether that's referring to some sort of specific condition or whether that's.
Let me go ahead and explain that capitalization. Is that let me go ahead and make clear again. I've probably done this in the past, but the Browne translation uses this archaic text format where that he not only capitalizes, to me, seemingly random words in the middle of the sentence, but he's got the old F character instead of S's.
Yeah.
And so
the long S. It's the long S.
Right.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about right now is I don't know whether he is intending to when he capitalizes a word in the middle of a sentence for emphasis or what he means. But unfortunately, for better or for worse, as I transcribe these, I often just don't follow that capitalization in the middle. So that's what you see there is probably an example of just how I happened to pick up that particular one. But why he said that is probably,
well, like I said, I'm just curious whether I was trying to dig up the Latin here real quick, but I can't put my finger on it right away.
To Monroe and Bailey, is there an equivalent translation there that you see? It's 591, just as cold. So it's certainly the word cold does appear there according to Monroe.
Yeah, so it may just be whenever you're cold and shivering, from having a fever or something like that. So
yeah,
I don't see either of them have blocked it off as a special case or anything.
Right. It probably is just Browne using some kind of emphasis, or maybe he's capitalizing the nouns when he gets to them or something. I don't understand his system. Then 601 goes back to the comment we were making a minute ago. Even those who think the heavens and earth are eternal and will be preserved safe forever, yet they dread the impending danger of these issues that we're talking about. So he's again referring to people who think that the heavens and the earth are eternal, which presumably means created divinely, as opposed to his own. Well, his own view, of course, is that the universe is eternal, but not that the worlds within it are eternal.
Right.
So I got to be careful describing that.
Yeah, I love the way that he talks about that people are afraid that the earth should instantly fall under their feet and sink into the great abyss. I mean, that's almost like sounds like a Chicken Little sort of story there.
Yeah, and so it says, lest the dissolution of the universe from the very foundation should follow and the fabric of the world should fall into ruin. So I presume what he's going to be doing, whether he's doing it clearly here or not, is I think their point was the world will be destroyed and come to an end, but the universe itself will never come to an end and will never be totally destroyed, and that was an important part of their physics. So I would presume, want to hammer that point in when he had a chance to, that there's the big distinction between the universe itself and our local world.
Exactly. I'm just curious from a purely cultural point of view, does Martin know the story of Chicken Little?
I didn't watch it, but that was in cinema several years ago, no?
Oh, that's right. It was made into a movie. That's right.
I'm not aware of that. It was this Chicken Little story is made into a movie?
Yeah, it was an animated movie, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I watched scenes of it, but only brief ones from commercials, I don't know the story itself.
Very briefly, and I think it might actually be applicable here, surprisingly enough. The little chicken is out one day and gets hit on the head by an acorn or something that falls off a tree, and he thinks that the sky itself is falling, and so he runs around and he tries to convince everybody that the sky is falling, and everybody makes a big fuss, and all the farm animals are in an uproar. And one of them finally takes him back to the tree, and the acorn is on the ground. They realize that the sky itself is not falling, but it's just an acorn that hit him on the head. And so he was just overexcited about the whole idea and just got running away with himself. And so I think that at least I think has some sort of applications to people who take a little piece of information and extrapolate from there, but in a religious sense, that you have something that happened to you and you suddenly give it a much wider significance than it actually has.
Don, you're right. I was mashing Chicken Little, the sky's falling, with The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and somehow coming up with only one when there's definitely two. The Boy Who Cried Wolf is the issue of the Cassandra type thing. You keep making predictions of bad things to come, and then nobody believes you when you do have a good reason to say bad things are coming.
Whenever the wolves finally do come and eat everybody.
So the Chicken Little story may be exactly on point then, if that's the point. I don't remember how the Chicken Little thing resolved itself.
I vaguely remember they finally took him. One of the farm animals took him back and said, "There's what hit you on the head right there. It was an acorn. It wasn't, the sky isn't falling, and now you've got us all, in an uproar, and you need to stop that." And
is there a memorable line or moral or summary that goes?
I don't
with
even
that?
know where it starts. I'm not even sure where the story came from originally, because it's I just remember it from my childhood. So
I would have expected Martin to know that, because many of our fables come from not Aesop, but who's the
Grimm's.
The German.
The
Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah.
Wasn't there two brothers, or the brothers Grimm? The brothers Grimm.
Yeah. Jacob and I can't remember what the other one's name was.
I'll have to look into
Jacob and Wilhelm. Jacob and Wilhelm. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that Chicken Little fable could be right on point. I'll have to look into that.
I don't think it's from them. So I think this story is too good that I would have overlooked it. So that means I think this is really an American story. So someone up in America, I guess. No, because within Europe, or this older Europe, people would exchange their stories. So that means most of the Grimm stories you find also in versions in France, in Spain, in the UK. So those stories were exchanged across Europe. But the United States produced some newer stories which didn't sink back into Europe for the in the collection of tales there.
Okay, well, Wikipedia, Henny Penny is a European folk tale with a moral in the form of a chicken who believes the world is coming to an end. But do you see, Don, where it comes from? It says European, but
the story is listed as Arne Thompson Uder Type 20C, which includes international examples. History. The story was part of the oral folk tradition and only began to appear in print after the Brothers Grimm had set a European example with their collection of German tales. Oh, my heavens. There was once a little chick named Cluck. That's the beginning of the 1823 Danish version of the story.
So that Danish version is
one of the earliest to collect tales from Scandinavian sources was Just Matthias Thiele, who in 1823 published an early version of the Henny Penny story in the Danish language.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I wonder if this does it come to a conclusion about, is there a line or something at the very end that summarizes what the chicken learned? I don't think it's really an issue of fear-mongering. I see fear-mongering listed in the Wikipedia. It sounds like to me it is more an issue of the improper deduction of something general from something local.
I think it's fear-mongering in the sense that Chicken Little tried to recruit everybody else to their way of thinking. That he tried to convince everybody else that the sky was falling, and then it was just, everybody was, running off helter-skelter.
Okay. Probably enough on Chicken Little.
And as I remember, there's a Buddhist version too, where I believe it's a rabbit that tries to convince everybody that Earth's coming to an end. Either they feel something, somebody walks by and he feels the earth tremble from an elephant walking by or something, or something hits them on the head, and all the animals are running towards, they're in a panic about this thing that's not really happening, and they're running towards a cliff. And a lion jumps in front of them and stops them from running over the cliff. And, of course, the lion is the personification of the Buddha and all that sort of thing. But he tells them, what you think is going to happen is not going to happen. And you need to look at, how things actually are and that kind of stuff.
The more I think about it,
I certainly didn't expect to get on that avenue. So
yeah, the more I think about it, it may have been a false path to take, because I'm thinking more and more that it's about fear-mongering is the lesson of Chicken Little, like it is on several of those things, when it ought to have been written as a issue of logic. So I guess the writer
today, don't you? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I think the reason I brought it up was because it seems to, whenever he's talking about, the people are afraid to face this and that sort of thing, that they're trying to convince everybody else to be afraid of it too.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it and don't. So it's sort of the anti-Chicken Little, where the Chicken Little is, getting everybody to believe what he believes with it. And the people who don't want to talk about the end of the world and don't want to consider that, they want everybody else to think the way they do, so that they feel more safe and feel that my position is correct.
Peer pressure and herd behavior and so forth.
Exactly.
But it should have been focused on logic. So I'll have to work on a better version of the Chicken Little story for the future. Okay, let's go back to the text.
I'm just gonna wait for you to insert the word logic into like every other sentence whenever we're talking here towards the end.
Exactly. That's what I'm attempting to do. That very thing. Okay, where are we?
6-8. So now we finished earthquakes, and now from 608 to 627, we have a very nice description of what has actually happened with the water cycle. So apart from the observations, and what he concludes there on the water cycle appears all accurate to me.
I agree.
Yes, that's very good. Yes.
I love the way he keeps talking about, it's like the water that's pulled off is such a minuscule amount that the reason you can't see it is because, so vast a circumference, a great store of water must be drawn off. So if you would take off enough to actually see it, it would just be ridiculous, the amount of water that would have to be taken off. It's just a continuous cycle.
Yeah, of course, he's also framing that in terms of why the sea never overflows.
Exactly.
Now we are to count why the waters of the sea are never increased, because men wonder that the nature doesn't enlarge the bounds, streams of so many rivers.
Yeah, I love that line about compared to the vastness of the sea are hardly more than one drop of water.
Yeah.
So he has a good concept of how huge the seas and the oceans actually are.
All right. After the water cycle discussion comes fires breaking out from Etna.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a little bit less accurate in his description of the working of volcanoes here, but still a natural explanation for it.
Mhm.
I was making notes real quickly whenever we're going through there, and he talks about the holy fire. There's such a thing as the holy fire that spreads over the body and burns the part of it, fixes upon, creeps over the limbs. I looked it up. The Latin is literally holy fire, sacer ignis. And I looked it up, and they said that it's either St. Anthony's fire, the condition from eating mushrooms, or it's some sort of fever that will come over you and causes a rash, and sounds like just a terrible sort of thing. So it's either an acute infection that typically causes a skin rash, or it's the effects of the ergot poisoning from mushrooms. So there is actually a sacer ignis in the LSJ dictionary, gives both of those possible meanings for that phrase.
Interesting. So I guess the point being that you can actually feel it moving from one part of your limbs to another, or notice it spreading.
And it just feels like, I guess, it would be, I assume, a high fever, and that's the reason that they're equating it with fire. And there's it looks like a couple other of course they wouldn't call it St. Anthony's fire because it's St. Anthony was not around whenever Lucretius was writing this. But they also said that it could possibly refer to shingles as well.
Don, you pointed out earlier the comment about the vastness of the seas and so forth. This episode is covering today some text that I might think of myself as sort of the Carl Sagan section, because here in six, you probably see where I'm going with 673. The bodies that we see, we imagine, are extraordinary, when alas, all beings with the heavens, the earth, and the sea together are nothing to the vast universe of all. I can hear that line ringing in Carl Sagan's voice about
billions and billions of worlds.
Right. And how small we are in relation to that.
Yep. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, Martin, you want to comment on the cavities and arches of stone that are beneath the surface and how these are caverns filled with wind and air? And that part was a little bit off base, I'm afraid.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, it misses some point which they couldn't know at that time. That there's quite pressure there, and it builds up this tectonic movement again, and then eventually the pressure will push it out through that. Through a volcano. No? But of course, then this comes with cavities. I mean, if you look into a volcano, you see there's this gaping hole, and there can also be cracks. Now that you see that in addition to that one big crater, you may have other holes as well where lava or gas or smoke or dust is coming out.
I guess that they certainly would have had observations of lava flows, but they don't seem to be talking about flows of liquid, more wind he keeps talking about.
Is the wind what is forcing the stuff out of the ground then, if I'm reading that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, it may, for some kinds, the kinds of volcanoes we had here nearby Cologne in the past, they were of that type, that we had a gas explosion and that was drive out a lot of rocks with them. No? And but this doesn't form then these nice craters you see, for example, in Japan with Fuji, or probably also with Etna in Sicily, discussed here. This gives then rise rather to shallow lakes, which we have in that area, which then have been created by those gas explosions.
Okay, well, we've successfully made it looks like, mostly through the end here. If we have any additional comments, we can go over them. I think I'll comment in addition that we made the decision to go long today on what we read because the texts seemed to flow together. When I was putting the vision together, I was seriously thinking about going on to line 703, though. We can reserve that for next week, but it's probably good to remind us today as well that the very next thing out of Lucretius's mouth is going to be another restatement of the issue that for some things, one cause is not enough, and we have to go to more than one possible cause and consider that more than one thing could be going on at the same time. So that's, I think, what he's done throughout the sections we've been reading for the last several weeks, is talking about several possible causes, all of which are natural, none of which are supernatural, and all of which are easy to understand once we apply the natural processes and understanding of atoms and void and all the things that arise from that. Okay, so we're probably at the end of today's session. What closing thoughts would you have today, Martin?
I have nothing to add to what I said already.
Okay, very good. Don, closing thoughts.
I think I've used up my allotment with my Chicken Little stories, so I think I'm good.
All right. Well, we will come back next week and talk about the Nile and additional issues of mountains and other geological phenomena, it appears, next week. So we have several more weeks to that to go. And at the same time, we'll do our best to relate these issues to some of the larger questions, such as Don has pointed out, the Chicken Little story, which is hard to pass over something as significant as the Chicken Little story. But I bet you those fables, as they arise, have tremendous value to many of them. I bet there are some fables directly on point with some of the logic issues we're talking about. Maybe we can come up with some of those this time.
There you go. Well. There's the start of a Epicurean children's book. Then we can,
Exactly.
Epicurean retelling of the fables, yeah.
The line that will never ever leave my mind from Torquatus and Cicero and On Ends is that we should be ashamed not to have learned these things when we were children. And I'll never live down the infamy that here we are, some of us on the very doorsteps of death in declining age, and still learning the basics that we should have been taught in a better world if the Epicureans were still around and continued their school. So.
Wow, way to end the podcast on
exactly. Wow. But that's what we're doing now. We're going to make that easier for future generations to come back and teach their children what they need to be taught.
There you go.
Want to top that, Don or Martin, for closing today, or shall we close?
You win.
Oh, close.
You win.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. We'll talk again in a week or so. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks and bye.